I had
I have
a quick contest. I don't mean to just contest you there, Villy, but you just said that nullsec isn't the bad guy, they're the good guy. But where's the evidence of that? Because we've had 4 years of no meaningful war between any of the blocks. So does that mean that the nullsec candidate? I mean, it implies that nullsec candidates have either ignored the opportunity to bring up measures to prompt war, or they've advocated against it. Where's the evidence that null blocks have actually pushed for anything that has actually caused any real war?
Okay, so I have to respond to this one, just because it's... So you just said there's been 4 years of no meaningful war between the blocks. Is that actually a statement you're making?
I'm not going to let you count goons going to the north and burning down the
I'm
NC
not
structures
counting
and
that.
then going home, or anything like that.
Like, come on now. Like, the entire South was invaded by the drone regions. I was literally in Vale 3 years ago and got evicted and had to retake the entire South. The entire South then fought the entirety of Winter Coalition and NC for like 7 months straight. Saying there's no meaningful war implies you have no actual understanding of the conflicts that are going on in 0-0.
But it looks the same. It still looks largely the same. None of why.
But it doesn't.
Well, I mean,
the
why,
entire
for
map is
instance,
shifted around 2 full times.
Well, it does look the same, but it kind of... The only reason that it really looks the same is because there's really no reason for anybody to move.
And so, why hasn't the null block pushed for there to be reason to actually go and like smash somebody, take their space, and keep it?
Well, it has been done. It has been done, and I know which war he was talking about, because I know that Darkness was also. But I was back then flying with Darkness. They were also involved in that war, and at some points it was extremely difficult as a normal member to see who you were fighting against, because you had the big sides, the drone coalition, you had a few other coalitions, and then you had a few alliances that were asked as Bedphone to come in and help support the fight. Only one day you were fighting one group, the other day you were flying with them. It was a very that is no say politics. It is simply very hard to see the difference between small gang fights at that point or massive fights that are erupting in the system further that you simply have no knowledge of.
I do have a bit of a counter to Liam there. You said that making larger groups spread out is going to push smaller groups out. Don't forget, spreading out a large group thins them out. This is more opportunities for PvP and raids into nullsec when the defense forces and the people there are thinner. I don't see how this could possibly not be a good thing for small groups to make the large alliances spread out. And don't forget, when large alliances are forced to spread out as well, there's also more opportunity for what starts as compartmentalization, splitting the big alliance up into different manageable groups, which is brilliant extra story creation for people wanting to set out on their own, for people feeling in their little groups that they're ready to split off and make their own as well. I also want to point out that not to you, Liam, but generally that incentivizing is not just adding something good for you to incentivize you to go and get it. It's also adding things that push you away from something as well. That's also what an incentive can be.
Well, with what you've just said there, you've went over about 4 different topics, but I think you were clearly wrong on at least 2 of them. One of them you need to understand is there's a huge difference between incentivizing something and punishing something else. And there's 2 dynamics that are very different. And right now we're seeing a bit of both. And generally when you punish players, there's a very different reaction from when you incentivize something else. As well, you made the statement that a higher density population is less good for PvP, when in fact the most PvP populated areas are actually the most dense because the PvPers know where they can go. Very dry, very like spread out areas where there's no people, very little people doing anything, are actually often the content deserts of EVE, not the content fucking jungles, right? They're the areas where people have the most trouble finding PvP.
Yeah, well, not if there were people living there because they've been pushed out from the inner city.
I'm just saying that what you're saying is the theoretical. The reality is that the PvP dense areas are the areas that are the most populated.
Yeah, but the only PvP that can happen there is quick in and out. There's far less opportunity for extended fights under an umbrella.
Just look at the reality of the situation.
Well, I disagree with what you say is the reality there.
I mean,
Well, look at
how many parts of Eve have you traveled through that's not just nullsec but lowsec that you can go 20 jumps without seeing a soul? If you spread it out, you're just going to get lower dense. It means that because how many small gangs do you see really roaming around that's less than 10 people? You get spread out and you get these systems with these 5 or 6 people. They're just going to dock up. They're not going to fight. They're just waiting for you to go by. Where if you go into my space or test space, what's going to happen? You're going to get a fight, or you're going to be bouncing staves, right? I mean,
so I'm in test space. I'm definitely going to get a fight with my small gang. And you mean fight, not just I've got to be in quick and out. Otherwise, there's going to be 100-man fleet there.
Right, and I agree with you. Like, small gangs, we come through, 5, 6 man, filament gangs come through, and we do the same, small gang stuff. But if you go through people, if you get small groups, but if you get small groups spread out into smaller and smaller groups, you'll get less people that actually are going to contend to those numbers that come through.
No, I don't think that's true. I think that spreading out will have.
It doesn't matter what you think. It just matters what the reality is. What we can see on Zkill right now.
Either.
I'm not saying what I think. I'm saying go look on Zkill and tell me where all the PvP activity in Eve is.
I mean, Blackout's a good representation of that front.
If I can add a little bit, I'd like to provide a bit of a case example of this exact thing. So Pandemic Horde and PanFam in general have a relatively large sphere of influence currently. And there are some relatively smaller groups that live on the edge that do occasionally come in to get fights and whatnot. And this was all good and all until such time as they actually started to harass structures and infrastructure. And at that very point, Horde's entire mentality went from they're here for fights to now we need to steamroll them. And this happened significantly. The moment they went from we're just here for some fights and a little bit of fun to saying we actually want to start cutting out our own space and taking this and pushing you out in these corners, the larger entity came and just steamrolled because they want that space to make sure that their sphere of influence is as large as possible when there are thin resources.
On the other hand, you also have if the large alliances, the large coalitions, like the one like Pandemic Horde, for example, you will notice after now with the mineral shortage, after that patch, you see the groups also floating around. They're more in Gemini.
So I have a question for you, Phantom, to counter. How much time does a fleet for you form up and you travel through gates? How much time do you think that takes to travel from system to system? Let's say 20 systems.
20 systems, and moving from one place aiming to get to the other place, or moving while
just finding your targets, the spread out targets that you're talking about. How much time does that?
Well, which region? The dead ones or the living ones?
Any.
Okay, guys. So basically, I'll give Phantomite that last second there to finish the thought, and then we're going to be moving on.
20 systems over random region rather than any specified types of region. 5 minutes to 45 minutes. It depends completely which region it is and what the activity is like there.
Perfect. And does Bornal have anything to add? He was kind of cut off a little bit.
Actually, yes. Because of the shortage, you see people from the coalitions, not just in Pandemic Horde, but you see them moving to other regions in the not too far out, but in the encounter and bordering regions. And they're actually getting resources there, which would also partly not just thin them out, but also leave them unprotected and outside of super range. And they're still getting minerals there, getting fights there. And that is actually improving the meta game instead of making it go down.
I feel this is how I feel, but it's also a bit of a response to Bernal there. Not all content in Eve is designed to scale up and down. There's plenty of content for small, there's plenty of content for big. Moons being something that is for big fleets is an objective opportunity for big fleets. And that's besides the fact that even though it wasn't properly implemented or followed up on, siphons was a brilliant start on the idea of being able to harass and profit from distant owners of moons. Now, something that you didn't mention when you asked this question was the way that you wrote the question for us to X up for. You said, at the end of it said, why do you support gameplay which doesn't require active participation from players? That's a bit loaded. It does. It requires fighting over it. It requires protecting it from the siphons that were there previously. It's not, when people talk about passive moons being, oh, why should people get something for nothing? No, they fight over it. That's the work. Except this time, the work is fun.
May I intervene in this?
Sure.
Okay, the way I saw it with the passive, and I've had a number of posts in LowSec when I was myself in a nullsec alliance, and the passive income out of a moon was for most alliances in LowSec, except of course for Technetium, Prometheum, and a few of the other stuff, was literally not enough to even reimburse stuff. It was just enough to keep the posts alive.
Didn't have the right moons then, mate.
Yeah, I just picked empty moons. But anyway, at the moment, the way it is now, as well, part of the SRP is being funded out of it. And for Pandemic Horde aspect at least, the miners get paid because they sell the aura to the alliance. And of course, they do not get either buy, but they still get funds out of it. And then, if they want to do reactions, they can, for a relatively low price, they can buy the reaction materials they need from the alliance. So in their way, it is everybody makes money out of it, as well the miner, the alliance, and stuff gets funded out of it.
Yeah, but
so
we
that's
lost
a
the
good
conflict
balance.
it created. There's plenty of
About
things
the
that people
process.
could go out and mine or rat, but we lost that, and it didn't come back.
Well, actually, I have to disagree with you on that, because that's a point I try to make. It is for all the fights over the bosses. Yes, I can remember those. Those are terrible, especially the Drake
Just
era.
because the implementation of POSes was terrible doesn't mean that the concept of passive moon mining itself wasn't something that undoubtedly created a lot of content in the past.
Well,
It all depends on what
that's-
CCP wants to put the dev time behind.
It does,
honestly.
true.
that
yeah.
was that
Because-
wasn't the question though. The question though was about passive moon mining or passive income.
Well, I'm talking about
Specifically
passive moon
income.
mining, dude.
No, sorry. It was passive income, where I made the point that passive income and the way that it has now been changed, that there isn't really much of a passive income, and it's all related to activity. That's a good thing.
Well, it's not, because
Why?
passive income methods need to be defended. Like the passive moon mining, you needed to defend it. That in itself almost makes it active itself.
The work
Because you
is
had the ethics.
PvP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like
and
Phantom might keep saying that, and he's absolutely right. The active work behind passive moon mining was always PvP, and it was the work that everyone really enjoyed.
I think that for me, one of the biggest things that hasn't been mentioned yet is what I refer to as Citadel geography, which is where citadels can be put. Now, we could talk for ages about proliferation and things like that, but aside from the proliferation aspect of where citadels can go, I don't know why CCP ever thought that it would be acceptable for people to essentially anchor a place to live on a gate, thereby giving them a gigantic advantage of response to things occurring on the gate, which is where so many fights happen in the first place. The fact that you can set up not just a citadel on the gate, but you can set up an entire constellation of citadels to do everything you want right on the gate is just one of the most tactically boring things that I think has ever happened.
The cat is out of the bag on so many of these issues that like going over them seems pointless to me.
Well, I don't
Yeah.
think it's pointless. I think even though the cat is out of the bag doesn't mean that, even if it would be a really painful path, doesn't mean we shouldn't start the fix. Like, for instance, one thing
But
saying
most of these things
like-
you're talking about are not like actually massive problems. Like the citadels being a gate, yeah, it's like maybe. Like
but
for something to
proliferation?
actually be for something to actually require fixing, it needs to be like an actual problem, not just like a maybe that's a problem. Like
Well, it is an actual problem.
it really isn't. And like to be honest, like let me explain. You're literally talking about forcing every Citadel owner in the game who owns a Citadel on a gate, which is a large majority of them, to unanchor their Citadels, either unrig or remove their rigs. Just put in context how much that actually represents in terms of workload, and think about how many people you're pissing off just so a couple people can have maybe their response to the gate is like 10 seconds slower, so we can have a slightly more engaging content. Like that's just
10
not
seconds is a long time, and just because something would be difficult to do doesn't mean that it's not a problem that needs to be addressed.
I'm not agreeing with you that it's even a problem.
Well, okay, cool. Well, we disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree on the point where you said it needs to be a problem for you to start fixing it. I don't think so. To move from a status quo area and to create more content, like killing those smaller structures easier, it's something that we can do. It's not a problem, but it's something that can still be improved.
You're talking about a company with limited resources. They cannot fix everything. So if they're gonna, when they prioritize their solutions, when they say, I need to fix this, 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 to get on that priority list, you need to actually be a problem. Because I hope everyone in this room can agree, there are significantly bigger problems than Citadels being anchored on gates right now.
I'm talking largely about the fact that they're not limited by location, not just gates. Gates is a problem, and I mean, you are working hard on your empire, but that's your point of view on it. Everybody else thinks it's a problem that the Citadel
keep saying
owner
everybody else, but everybody else is not actually everybody else. It's just you and a few of your buddies. Like I know what you're trying to say, but it's
thank
not
you for telling me that I don't matter and you do.
Sure, I'll happily say that too. But like but it's important to understand. Like something has to be truly a problem that all of the player base is going to recognize, and like I just don't see their Citadels on gates being a problem that truly the player base is going to unify around to require a solution that's going to require that insane level of effort from the players.
Okay, so what about all the other points?
Set the range to be 1,000,000 kilometers minimum off a gate, right? Or like
but
1
once
AU
again,
off a gate.
Out of the bag.
It doesn't mean it shouldn't be addressed just because it's difficult to address.
All right, who's up next?
All right, so Phantomite. So this one's kind of long, so I'm going to try and read it all and have it make sense. On a recent Trash Talk Tuesday episode, some candidates referred to as just, quote, presenting ideas to CCP and that your ideas are already implemented. Others have also referred to you as combative in discussions. How will you be prepared to handle a business meeting as a consultant while in Iceland, and do you have a plan besides bringing ideas and concerns to CCP?
Well, with the first part about, for people to say, oh yeah, that's already fixed. It's not true, and I can guarantee that was almost certainly just about the capital questions that are in that video of the question I asked at Eve London. Capitals are not done yet. It doesn't mean that the changes haven't been good for them. I would argue that in PvP terms, super carriers are starting to have a much more defined role rather than kill everything. That's pretty good. There are a number of items about capitals that are still separating them from subcaps completely, which is not okay. I don't want capitals to not be powerful. I want them to be powerful when they are used in conjunction with smart sets of support. And one of multiple issues with capitals, for instance, is the existence of capital cap boosters and 3200s. Capital cap boosters and 3200s mean that, especially in small and medium against caps, they don't need to worry about newts. They can just cap boost away from those newts. That's not okay. It is a huge power. Capitals are by no means finished being fixed, and my intent is to keep on working with CCP to make sure that they finish this continual balance pass on caps. People are very well aware of my thoughts on other huge problems, such as we were talking earlier about Citadel geography and talking about conflict drivers in the form of passive moons having been ripped away from Eve and nothing having been put back in their place. As to how I would work with CCP while I'm described as combative, I think that we've had 4 years of none of these issues being fixed at all. And so I don't think that any of the current methods that either CCP or the CSM or both CCP and the CSM have been doing have actually done anything to fix these issues. So to call me combative, it could well be correct, but these problems have gone on for far too long to just go in and say, hey, what you doing, CCP? And they go, oh, we're thinking of doing this tiny thing here. And for me to just go, oh yeah, cool, carry on. It's time for a fresh approach to this.
So follow up to that, do you consider yourself combative, or do you consider yourself like maybe another like adjective or?
I feel like the reason I didn't do this sooner is because I always held out hope that it would get fixed. For me to kind of be reasonably combative now, I think that, you know, it's been 4 years. My opinions are very strong on these issues, which is also, in my mind, a very good reason that people should actually vote for me. I think that campaign period and active period with CCP are two separate things. And during the campaign, I've got to compete with everybody. I've got to show everybody how I feel about these things, and I've got to make sure that nobody else tells me what my ideas are. So that's why it may come across as combative.
So it's about citadels. Going back to that, the question is, would you consider a form of citadel tiericide? For an example, 1 keep star per region, 2 forts per constellation, and so on. Do you see an upside or downside to this?
Yes, absolutely. The numbers could be discussed and argued, but absolutely yes.
I'm gonna tell you why that's bad.
Lousy with structures.
So-
Absolutely minimize how many you can.
So there's around Delve, there's a small group of dudes who have managed to be one of the most irritating people that, and we can talk about I can't remember the alliance that bothers Villy's group in ESO, but those dudes, if you lock a region or a constellation or a system to how many citadels you can anchor in it, nothing stops those groups from getting completely bullied out by the like goons or the Imperium as large rolling into those systems and just spam dropping citadels that they don't intend to actually defend. You'll just muscle those groups out by sheer virtue of numbers, and it's not a good idea.
Yeah, but there are
Purely
mechanics that you could
based on- yeah.
implement to do that. Like you could make some interesting tied to solve allowance for citadels, you know.
Telling you, if you put so this is all hypothetical and we don't know how that would pan out. If you put a solid cap number on how many of X amount of keep stars, how many sodios, how many et cetera, on systems or constellations or regions, null blocks will absolutely abuse it, and you will never get shit anchored anywhere near us.
Unless they had to hold a certain amount of SOV in a region to
It's
be
just
allowed
like the
to
old,
anchor the
the
keep
old
star.
POS system.
Yeah.
Talking about SOV, we're talking about the areas, the NPC null, the low sec near.
Then maybe there need to be maybe the limit needs to be based on the number of, well, you know, it used to be the locations were moons and then planets for the lone outpost, and that worked pretty well. You fought hard to get your foothold POS in, that kind of thing, but just because there would be some problems with an alternate system doesn't mean that we shouldn't kill an even bigger problem at all.
Well, provide us a way to do it. And like, I'm sure everyone here is willing to listen to a good idea. It's just saying there should be a limit. Is not like an idea. It's just a theoretical piece, right? Like, because if you say the
I can answer this, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what. We'll have a quick back and forth, and you can point out a problem, and I think I'll be able to sort of give you an idea of how that would be overcome. 2 potential ways to do it: limiting it to moons and planets, and having some form of a bandwidth for citadels. So yeah, maybe you would be able to have a keep star in every single constellation, but it would eat up that citadel bandwidth like mad, you know.
Bandwidth.
So one thing that that LB brings up in the Twitch chat is that tying TCUs to the ability to anchor citadels could be a decent way to do it.
Maybe using a TCU to provide extra bandwidth to have that keep star.
Maybe providing to do any fucking at all at this point would be.
Yes, but what I would say, if and just to kind of to steer the conversation back to like whether we think that the tier site is a good idea or not, it could be implemented in a number of different ways, right? Like you could say large and XL citadels to yourself, like the 1 keep star per region, 2 forts per constellation, and like Sotio, Tatara, that kind of stuff. Those bigger structures are limited, but for instance, things like an Astra House and Athenor are unlimited, so that these groups that want to break in can still
I
break
might
into
argue
the
not
structures.
unlimited.
Well, I mean, it's unlimited right now, right? So this
Yeah,
is
and it's
how
a
this is
problem.
would you agree that that would be a way to kind of bring it as a compromise? Like, Bunny, would you support something like that since you were pretty adamantly against it?
What? I'm sorry. What part?
So the part where it would be certain types of structures have a limit, for instance, keep stars, fortizars, tataras, sotios, but then the smaller structures do not.
So kind of like the system, instead of having the level 5 system, you have that hardened keystar system. I mean,
You see the chat. Somebody's saying
I
the
don't
more
know.
friendly citadels you have, the faster your ADMs drop.
I honestly, it's there.
It's
You can go
counterintuitive.
back. You can go back and forth about how you should balance citadels and Sov, but ultimately ADMs, I don't really. I honestly, I'm a bad person to discuss ADMs with because I think that system sucks inherently. But it's really hard to debate about what we do, how to balance citadels because it's not one problem with citadels, man. It's a huge thing. The number sucks. The fighting them sucks. It's really hard just to pick one issue and debate it without having to actually tackle all of the issues when it comes to citadels.
Well,
And
the
that-
key problem
that's
that
why-
most people don't get either is that you also have to provide solutions, not just problem identifications that don't
Exactly.
create more problems, right?
Okay,
Like,
bandwidth or location limits. There we go.
right, but
I mean,
So let me
saying bandwidth doesn't actually provide a solution. It just says bandwidth.
Okay, what's the problem with having a certain bandwidth? There will be a problem.
You have to
Let me know what it
explain
is.
the
Let's talk
solution
about it.
first before I can tell you how it's terrible.
Okay, systems have a certain amount of bandwidth available, and the solve holder can place citadels that go up to but not over that allotted bandwidth.
What about
Bigger
people who are
citadels
not?
use up
so
more
he's
bandwidth.
he's talking about using solve systems in the same as an additive factor mathematically leading up to a total that you're consuming out of in the same way that rigs use calibration on the ship. So in a
Okay, so I get
constellation,
that,
the
but
biggest
what's the
structure you
number?
can fit.
And what about people
dude,
that don't?
If you want me to tell you instantly the exact number, this is the general kind of
The
solution
devil is
to the
always
problem.
in the details on this stuff.
Okay,
That's
well, I'll
what
tell you what,
determines.
let's spend the next 3 months figuring out exactly what that number should be.
To be fair, Veli, to be fair, if the question is more this idea at a high level, is there a potential for it to work if you find the right number?
Thank you very much for listening. It's been great. I feel like a vote for me is a vote for somebody who has a focus specifically on some of the biggest problems in the game, and that disagreement is the first step towards actually solving some of the problems that haven't gone away. Insidious said he'd be grateful for spot number 10. However, I'm currently recommending him for my number 3 after Loro. I've had some great fights with Insidious, and with Laura, I've had enough conversations now that I feel that he is approaching some of the same serious problems from a different angle to me. So if it's not me, I think he can represent some of the same problems. Perhaps not with the same method I would, but the same important problems nonetheless.